Okay, so I wanted to do another one of these today from class because I thought I was not maybe my best self today. So this is going to be a quick explanation of preload, contractility, afterload. I put kind of the basic definitions over here on the left for you guys to look at. Preload is really the stretch of that cardiac muscle. It's the filling of the heart during diastole. It also kind of equals end diastolic volume, or EDV. Contractility, think Frank Starling law, the force of the ventricles ejecting the stroke volume through the semilunar valves into the arteries, both your pulmonary and your aortic. Afterload is the resistance the ventricles have to work against. So that's your pulmonary vascular resistance and your systemic vascular resistance. You could think almost like an impedance to blood flow. Afterload is a bad thing. Stroke volume, abbreviated SV, is the amount of blood ejected by the ventricles into the arteries, both the pulmonary and the aortic. The average for that is around 70 mils. Your ejection fraction, or EF, is the percentage of the end diastolic volume that is ejected from the ventricles, and you get that by taking your stroke volume divided by your end diastolic volume, and that's going to give you your ejection fraction. So if you think about the fact that the end diastolic volume is how much blood you have to work with, and the stroke volume is what actually gets out during a heartbeat, that's kind of the way that I look at that one. Your end diastolic volume is your potential, your stroke volume is what you actually get. Again, end diastolic volume, EDV, is the amount of blood in the ventricles at the end of diastole. It's the amount of blood the heart has to work with, essentially, for a heartbeat. So kind of walking this through with circulation, I'm sure you guys are getting a little bit sick of this order, but just repetition, I think, is important for this. So here you have your right atrium. If you don't know your circulation yet, really get on memorizing that. So this is your right atrium. This is your right ventricle. This is your left atrium here. And this is your left ventricle. So if you're talking about preload, okay, that stretch of that cardiac muscle, you can kind of think about preload as happening during the relaxation phase. So preload is kind of here and here, because your AV valves are open during diastole. So we'll do preload here. Pardon my penmanship, it's a little tough when I get small. Preload here. So if you're thinking about preload, this is during diastole when the heart is at rest. You have blood flow coming in from your superior vena cava, blood flow coming in through your inferior vena cava. It's filling your heart on the right side. It's coming down through those open AV valves. It's filling the ventricle. Same thing is happening on the left side. You have blood coming back from the lungs through the pulmonary veins, right here and right here. So this is oxygenated blood coming back from the lung through the pulmonary veins that are filling the left atrium into your left ventricle, right? And as this is filling, you have to think your heart is expanding, because anytime you're taking on a volume, that's going to cause a stretch, right? So all this blood is coming in on both the right and the left-hand side, and it's causing your heart to not only fill, but as it fills, it stretches, okay? That cardiac muscle stretches. And we know because of the Frank Starling law that the greater the stretch, the greater the contraction. So you have this first component being the preload, which is the filling of the heart. So if you think about how this is going to affect stroke volume, the more full your heart is before systole, the more blood that has filled your heart, the greater your stroke volume is going to be. So if you increase your preload, you're going to increase your stroke volume. If you decrease your preload, you're going to decrease your stroke volume, okay? Those are directly related. So if you increase your preload, you're increasing the stretch of the cardiac muscles, you're increasing the filling of the heart, you're increasing the end diastolic volume, so you'd be increasing your stroke volume. If you decrease preload, any of those components, you'll decrease your stroke volume. So as your cardiac muscle stretches, it's getting ready to go into systole. Those AV valves are going to slam shut, making that lub noise, just tying it all together. And now you've got your contractility. So the contractility is really referring to those ventricles and the muscular contraction that they have. And if we're talking about contractility, we're talking about the depolarization of our ventricles. Okay, so your AV valves are shut. All of this is going to contract. This interventricular septum, this wall here, all of this is going to contract, and it's going to push down on that blood volume to eject it out through the arteries. So contractility is a big part of what determines stroke volume, because if you increase your contractility, you are going to increase your stroke volume. If those ventricles really are able to forcefully eject that blood out, it's going to increase the amount of blood that goes out. If you decrease your contractility, you're going to decrease your stroke volume, okay? So these are also direct related. So increase your contractility, increase your stroke volume, decrease your contractility, decrease your stroke volume. The last component that we're going to talk about is these ventricles are going to be ejecting the blood through these semilunar valves. So if this is our semilunar valve and it's open, and that's where that blood is going to go out. So this is where our stroke volume is going to be going out here. And then here is the aortic artery. And we're going to have blood volume coming through here. Okay, so afterload is the resistance that those ventricles have to push against, essentially. So when you think about the fact that anytime a liquid or a gas are moving through, I almost think about them as tunnels, but like bronchioles or vessels, they're going to meet a certain amount of like frictional forces or resistance, right? So your afterload is what both your ventricles have to work against to get that blood out. And you obviously want that to be minimal. You want minimal resistance, because if you think about afterload as working against your heart, it's a bad thing. It's working against that blood flow. Here it's working against it. It's the resistance. So if you increase your afterload, you're going to decrease your stroke volume. You're basically making it so that those ventricles have to work way harder to get that blood out. If you decrease your afterload, if you make less resistance, then you're going to increase your stroke volume. So of the three components that affect stroke volume, afterload's the one we don't like. It's bad. So the less afterload you have, the less resistance you have, the more stroke volume you have. So I just kind of wanted to highlight that. So that's kind of where those components come into play. That's like the visual that I can give you to try to explain the preload, contractility, and afterload. I'm gonna, I think, stop this here so it's short, and then I'll do another one coming up here in a second.